My son went missing for 15 years. Last night, he came back. My son Thomas vanished on the 30th of November 2004. He was 12 and had been playing football in our front garden when he disappeared off the face of the earth. There was no media circus for Thomas, despite my best efforts to get his case some attention. He wasn't at a cute age, and although people pretended to be sympathetic, I overheard more than one person in our small market town gossiping that he'd probably run away. We hadn't always been the most stable family, if truth be known. In small towns like ours, everyone latches onto any negative gossip they can get their hands on. It's like a local pastime. True, my husband Dylan and I had been arguing a couple of hours before Thomas went missing. And it shames me to say I knew he could hear us shouting from outside. The banging of the football against the house's walls got louder and angrier as our argument escalated. When the police officer we reported Thomas as missing to heard we'd been arguing a lot recently, I saw his eyes glaze over. A runaway, he was thinking. Just another runaway. A couple of weeks of frantic searching from us later, the police were suddenly more interested. But by then, any evidence they might have gathered had long gone. No trace of Thomas was ever found. I always left the front light on for Thomas, even years later. I never gave up searching, and all my energies went into it. My life was searching for Thomas. Work, friends, and hobbies fell by the wayside one by one. Dylan was initially sympathetic, and our arguments even got better for a while. By the end of the first year, I started to notice his heart wasn't really in the search anymore. By the time the second anniversary rolled around, he started telling me to get over it, move on, and stop acting crazy. I threw him out. He didn't argue. I'd never felt so alone. I'd taken to sleeping with old Ted, the toy Thomas had loved as a young child. He'd carried it everywhere for years and loved most of its fur off, before sheepishly giving it to me at the age of 10. "Thought you might want to keep it," he'd said, avoiding my eyes. I'd tried not to laugh and put old Ted at the bottom of a drawer for safekeeping. Who knew that token of his childhood would be so important in keeping me company on hundreds of lonely nights when I cried myself to sleep, missing my boy so much it physically hurt. Last night was windy, and at first I thought I was imagining the knocking. It got louder and more insistent. It was 10 p.m., almost time for me to go to bed, and I was irritated that someone would bother me at this time. The door swung open, and there he was. My darling, wonderful Thomas, all grown up. It took a while for my eyes to relay the information to my disbelieving brain. "Hi, Mum," he said. His voice was deep and manly now, but as cheeky as ever. I collapsed into his arms. My emotions were too overwhelming to say anything. I just heaved and cried into his shoulder. He half hugged, half carried me to the nearest chair and sat me down. I looked into his face, surveying the miracle. His features had filled out, and he even stubble now. But there was no doubt about it. There was my boy. "I've missed you. I missed you so, so much, darling." He grinned again and nodded towards my hands. "I can see that." I only realized then that I was still clinging to old Ted. "But sweetheart, where have you been? What happened? I thought you were dead. Thought some scumbag abducted you." Thomas shook his head. "There'll be time to explain all that. Where's Dad?" I swallowed and wondered how to explain. I hadn't spoken to Dylan for years. "He's not here. Mum, can you get him here? I really want to see him." How could I say no? I dialed Dylan, hoping he still had the same mobile number. To my relief, it rang, and he answered. I told him I needed him round straight away. It was an emergency. His grumbling made me angry. Any hesitation was time away from my boy, but he relented eventually. As we waited, I spoke to Thomas, a decade and a half of things I wanted to say to him spilling out. Whenever I tried to move the subject on to where he'd been, what had stopped him coming back, or what made him leave, he clammed up and said all would be clear later. I was terrified of scaring him away again, so I backed off. We mostly talked about what his cousins and school friends had been up to. He found it funny I'd left the light on every night, but from the distinctive way he looked away when I mentioned it, I knew he was touched. Dylan turned up after a few minutes, moaning about how I'd called him at this ridiculous hour and how I was hysterical. I said nothing. I couldn't formulate the words. I simply grabbed him by the arm and dragged him into the lounge. I've never seen someone stiffen so quickly and completely. Dylan looked like he'd been given an electric shock. Thomas didn't rush to him. It was the strangest reunion I'd ever seen. "Hello, Dad," Thomas said. His voice was harder somehow. "Impossible," Dylan muttered finally. "It's him, Dylan," I cried, feeling the tears of joy sting my eyes again. "It's our Thomas." "Don't be ridiculous, Martha," Dylan barked at me. "It's not him." I was taken aback. How could he look at this man, so obviously our boy, and not recognize him instantly? "Look, I don't know who you are," Dylan growled at Thomas, stepping into his space. "I don't know whether you're after money or attention or what, but I want you to get out of this house this instant and never come back. You're not our son." Thomas stood his ground. He was a good 6 inches taller than his father now, and much more sturdily built. "Oh yeah? What makes you so certain, Dad?" They looked into each other's faces, sizing each other up. "How about you tell Mom why you're so sure I'm not your son?" Thomas challenged. I was lost. All I knew was the creeping sense of dread growing in my gut. "What does he mean, Dylan? Can one of you tell me what's going on?" Dylan breathed in through his nose and closed his eyes. He paused for what seemed like an age. "I'm so sorry, Martha." This was the first time I'd ever heard Dylan apologize in over 2 decades of knowing him. I almost wanted to put my hand over his mouth, stopping him saying what I knew he would say next. I didn't think I could bear to hear it. It was me. I did it. I killed Thomas the day he went missing. I strangled him and hid his body in the lake. A deathly silence fell over the room. I felt my heartbeat pulsing in my ears. Every night I'd spent crying, sobbing away in my then-husband's arms. It all raced past my eyes in that moment. I thought I might vomit. "That's it, Dad," Thomas scoffed. "You're not going to tell her why?" "Nah, didn't think so. After all these years, you're still a coward. That's why you killed me, isn't it? Didn't want me blabbing to people about what you'd done to me over all those years? Fucking pervert. Your freedom, your reputation, your life? I was worth sacrificing, so you could keep going as if everything was normal." Dylan didn't respond. He simply bowed his head. I don't remember grabbing the heavy lamp from the coffee table. I don't remember slamming it, with all my strength, into the back of Dylan's lowered head. I don't remember the immediate aftermath. I just remember dropping the blood-spattered light to the floor and looking at Dylan's oozing corpse, half his head missing. My whole body was shaking. I put my hands over my face and sobbed. Thomas, or whoever the hell this twin of his was, held me. "Who are you?" I gasped through desperate cries. "I am Thomas, Mum. I promise I believed him because I wanted to." That counterbalanced my knowledge it was impossible. Maybe Dylan had just thought he'd killed him, and Thomas had survived and run away to start a new life? There were 2 spades in the garage. It took Thomas and I 2 hours to dig a shallow grave. He was tough and strong, and dug quickly. We didn't speak as we carried out the task, or as we lowered Dylan's body into it. I spat on his body before we filled it back in again. By the time we'd finished the job completely, it was almost dawn. Thomas looked at me sadly. "I want you to drive me somewhere," he said quietly. I nodded. He directed me to the lake at the edge of town. We sat in silence for a moment. "This is where he took me," Thomas said. I lowered my head to the steering wheel and cried. I felt like I might run out of tears. Thomas's hand was on my back for a moment, and then it was gone. I lifted my head. The passenger seat next to me was empty. I'd half expected this, but it felt like my heart was being ripped out for a second time. As I drove home alone, my grief was replaced by something better, a plan. I'm going to sell my house. I'll use the money to pay for a team to dredge the lake. They'll find his remains, of course, and I'll give him a proper burial. Once that's done, I'll join my boy. There's nothing left for me in this life, and I only want to be with Thomas. I hope I've done him proud. As I sit here, cuddling old Teddy and thinking joyously about how we'll be reunited properly at the end of this month, I couldn't be happier. In the days that followed, I found myself in a haze of emotions, oscillating between grief and determination. The revelation of Dylan's monstrous act had shattered the fragile reality I had clung to for years. Yet, amidst the wreckage, there was clarity, a purpose that propelled me forward. I began the process of selling the house, the place that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. Every room held memories of Thomas, echoes of laughter and love that had once filled our lives. But it was also a place of secrets and lies, and I knew I had to let it go to find peace. As I sorted through our belongings, I found myself lingering over items that had belonged to Thomas. A baseball glove, a stack of comic books, a half-finished model airplane. Each item was a tangible reminder of the boy he had been, the son I had lost. I packed them carefully, intending to keep them with me until the end. The community, unaware of the dark truth that had unfolded within our walls, offered their condolences as news of Dylan's sudden disappearance spread. I played the part of the grieving widow, accepting their sympathy with a hollow smile. Inside, I was counting down the days until I could set my plan into motion. I hired a team to dredge the lake, presenting it as a personal project to clean up the area. They had no idea of the true purpose behind my request, and I watched from a distance as they worked, my heart heavy with anticipation. It took several days, but eventually they found what I'd been waiting for, remains that were identified as Thomas's. The confirmation brought a bittersweet sense of closure. My son had been found, and I could finally lay him to rest with the dignity he deserved. The funeral was a small, private affair. I chose a peaceful spot in the cemetery, surrounded by trees and flowers, a place where Thomas could find the peace that had been denied to him in life. I stood by his grave, clutching old Teddy, and whispered a promise to him that we would be together soon. With the house sold and my affairs in order, I spent my final days reflecting on the life I had lived and the choices I had made. I wrote letters to the few people who mattered, expressing gratitude for their kindness and support. I wanted them to know that I was at peace with my decision, that I was ready to join Thomas in whatever lay beyond. On the last night, I sat in Thomas's old room, surrounded by his things, and allowed myself to remember the joy he had brought into my life. I held old Teddy close, feeling the worn fabric against my cheek, and closed my eyes. As I drifted off, I imagined Thomas waiting for me, his hand outstretched, ready to lead me into the light. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a certainty that I was making the right choice. In the end, it wasn't about leaving this world behind, but about reuniting with the one person who had meant everything to me. I knew that wherever Thomas was, I would find him, and we would be together again, free from the pain and suffering that had defined our lives. And so, with a heart full of love and a spirit unburdened, I embraced the unknown, ready to take the final step into eternity. After Thomas returned, the initial shock and joy of his reappearance were quickly overshadowed by the tension between him and his father, Dylan. The revelation of Dylan's heinous act, his admission of having killed Thomas and hidden his body, created a rift that could not be mended. Thomas's return was shrouded in mystery, as he refused to divulge where he had been or how he had survived. Thomas's demeanor was different, marked by a maturity and strength that belied his years. He was no longer the boy who had disappeared, but a man who had faced unimaginable challenges. Despite his mother's desperate attempts to learn more about his disappearance, Thomas remained tight-lipped, insisting that all would be revealed in time. The confrontation between Thomas and Dylan culminated in a tragic and violent end, with Martha, Thomas's mother, taking drastic action to protect her son and herself. The aftermath left Martha grappling with the reality of what Dylan had done and the consequences of her own actions. Thomas's return, while miraculous, was bittersweet. It forced Martha to confront the dark truths of her past and the man she had once loved. Yet, it also offered a glimmer of hope, a chance for closure and the possibility of healing. As Thomas and Martha buried Dylan's body, they did so with the understanding that their lives would never be the same. Thomas's presence was both a comfort and a reminder of the pain they had endured. Together, they faced the future, determined to find peace and rebuild their lives, even as the shadows of the past lingered in the background. The challenges Thomas faced during his absence were numerous and complex, shaped by the mysterious circumstances surrounding his disappearance. While the exact details of his time away remain shrouded in mystery, several key challenges can be inferred. Survival. At the age of 12, Thomas would have faced significant challenges in terms of basic survival. Finding food, shelter, and safety would have been immediate concerns, especially if he was in an unfamiliar or hostile environment. Isolation. Being separated from his family and familiar surroundings, Thomas likely experienced profound loneliness and isolation. The lack of contact with loved ones and the uncertainty of his situation would have been emotionally taxing. Identity and adaptation. Over 15 years, Thomas would have had to adapt to new circumstances, possibly assuming a new identity or integrating into a different community. This adaptation would require resilience and the ability to navigate complex social dynamics. Trauma and psychological impact. The circumstances of his disappearance and the events that followed could have been traumatic. Coping with the psychological impact of his experiences, including any abuse or exploitation he might have faced, would be a significant challenge. Desire for reunion and fear of rejection. As time passed, Thomas might have grappled with the desire to reunite with his family and the fear of how he would be received. The uncertainty of whether he would be welcomed back or blamed for his disappearance could weigh heavily on him. Reintegration. Upon his return, Thomas would face the challenge of reintegrating into a life that had moved on without him, reconnecting with family, catching up on lost years, and finding his place in a world that had changed would require patience and understanding. These challenges highlight the resilience and strength Thomas would have needed to endure his absence and eventually find his way back home. The specific events that caused Thomas's trauma during his 15-year absence are not detailed explicitly in the narrative provided. However, we can infer several potential traumatic experiences based on the context of his disappearance and the challenges he faced. Abduction or coercion. Given that Thomas vanished suddenly while playing in his front yard, it is possible that he was abducted or coerced by someone, leading to immediate fear and confusion. Isolation from family. Being forcibly separated from his family at a young age would have been deeply traumatic. The loss of familiar support systems and the uncertainty about whether he would ever see his loved ones again could have caused significant emotional distress. Survival challenges. If Thomas was left to fend for himself or placed in a situation where he had to survive without adult guidance, the struggle to meet basic needs like food, shelter, and safety would have been a source of ongoing trauma. Abuse or exploitation. In many cases of long-term disappearance, individuals may face abuse or exploitation. If Thomas encountered such situations, they would have contributed to his trauma. Identity crisis. Over time, Thomas may have been forced to assume a new identity or live under circumstances that conflicted with his sense of self, leading to an internal struggle and identity crisis. Witnessing or experiencing violence. If Thomas was exposed to violent situations or had to defend himself from harm, these experiences would have left lasting psychological scars. Fear of returning. Even after finding a way back, Thomas might have experienced anxiety about how he would be received by his family and community, fearing rejection or disbelief. These inferred events suggest a complex web of traumatic experiences that Thomas would need to process and heal from upon his return.
Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.